There is a Hebrew word at the center of the Old Testament that has been mistranslated into English for 400 years. It appears almost 200 times in the Hebrew Bible. It fills the temple. It descends on Sinai. It rests on the face of Moses. It departs from the temple in Ezekiel and returns in the Gospels. And almost every time you read it in your English Bible, the word printed on the page is wrong. Not slightly wrong, not nuance wrong, wrong in a way that changes how you read entire books. The word is Kabod. Your English Bible translates it glory. The problem is, glory in English means something like brightness or fame or honor. Kabod in Hebrew means none of those things, not at the root, not at the core. Kabod means weight, heaviness, substance. The Hebrew root is kavad, which appears all over Scripture in places that have nothing to do with brightness. It is the word used when Eli the priest is so heavy he falls off his chair and breaks his neck. It is the word used for the heavy famine in the days of Abraham. It is the word used for hands that grow heavy in battle. The same root. By the end of this video, you will see something most people miss. When the Hebrew Bible talks about the Kabod of God, it is not describing a glow. It is describing a weight, something so dense it can fill a room, something so heavy it can be felt before it is seen, something with mass. And the moment you understand that, the entire Old Testament starts to read differently. The Psalms especially. Because David is not writing about brightness, he is writing about the weight of God's presence pressing down on a man who knows he cannot stand under it alone. Here is where we are. To understand Kabod, you have to understand how Hebrew works. Hebrew is not like English. English is a language of nouns. Things are what they are. A word names an object, and the object stays still inside the word. Hebrew is a language of roots. Every word is built from a three-letter root that carries a physical action, and the noun, the verb, the adjective, all radiate out from that root like spokes on a wheel. Hebrew never lets a word forget where it came from. The root behind kabod is KBD, 3 Hebrew letters, Kaf, Bet, Dalet, and every word built from those 3 letters carries the same physical idea: heaviness, density, weight. When the Hebrew Bible wants to say something is heavy, it uses kavad. When it wants to say something is honored, it uses the same root, because to honor someone in Hebrew is to give them weight, to take them seriously, to let their words land with substance instead of bouncing off. Even the word for liver, the heaviest organ in the body, comes from this same root. The ancient Hebrews looked at the liver and called it the kavad, the heavy thing. You can see how literal this is when you watch the opposite of kavad in the same root system. The Hebrew word for cursing, kalal, comes from a root that means to make light. To curse someone in Hebrew is to lighten them, to strip them of mass, to reduce them to a thing that does not count. And to bless someone, to honor them, is the reverse motion. It is to give them weight, to pile substance on them until they cannot be brushed aside. The whole moral universe of the Old Testament is built on this physics: the heavy and the light, the substantial and the weightless, kabod and its absence. Notice this: the English word honor has lost that physical sense. We use it as a feeling. He felt honored. She was honored to be there. But the Hebrew kavad is never a feeling. It is a quantity. It is something that can be added to a person, taken away from a person, weighed, measured, transferred. When the Hebrew Bible says God is to be honored, it is saying God has weight. He counts for something. He cannot be brushed aside. And when it says God is glorified, it is saying his weight has become visible. Look at how the Hebrew Bible uses this root in places that have nothing to do with God, and you see the metaphor is not abstract at all. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, Eli the priest hears that his sons have died and the Ark of the Covenant has been captured by the Philistines. He falls backward off his chair, breaks his neck, and dies. The text says he was an old man, and kavad, heavy. The word your English Bible translates as glory is the same word the narrator uses to describe a body too heavy to keep its balance. There is no separation in Hebrew between the physical and the spiritual sense of this root. They are the same word, doing the same job. In Genesis chapter 18, Abraham hears that the outcry against Sodom has become kavad, heavy. The sin has accumulated mass. It has reached a weight the city cannot hold. In Exodus chapter 8, Pharaoh hardens his heart, and the Hebrew literally says he made his heart kavad. Heavy, dense, unmovable. The same root that describes the kabod filling the tabernacle describes the heart of a king refusing to bend. Weight in Hebrew is moral as well as physical. Substance is character. Density is decision. In Numbers chapter 11, the people of Israel complain that the manna in the wilderness has become light to them. The word the narrator uses for their boredom is from the opposite root. The miracle bread from heaven has lost its weight in their mouths. They want meat. They want substance they can chew. And the very next sentence tells you that the Lord's anger grew kavad against them. Heavy. The same root, but now turned the other direction. The complaint had no weight, but the response did. Hebrew is constantly weighing things, constantly measuring mass. This matters for reading the Psalms because David is writing inside this entire grammar. When he says the heavens declare the kabod of God, he is borrowing from the same word that just described Eli falling off a chair. The metaphor is consistent, real, physical, always. Think about what that means for one of the most famous scenes in the Old Testament. In Exodus chapter 40, Moses finishes building the tabernacle. The text says, "The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the kabod of the Lord filled the tabernacle." Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the kabod of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Most English Bibles translate that as the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and you probably picture light, a radiant brightness, maybe a golden shimmer. That is not what the Hebrew is saying. The Hebrew is saying something heavy moved into the tent, something with weight, something so dense that Moses, who has spoken with God face to face, who has come down from Sinai with his own face glowing, cannot push through it. He is not blinded. He is blocked. The presence has mass. It fills the room the way water fills a cup, and he cannot to not get in. The same thing happens in 1 Kings chapter 8. Solomon dedicates the temple. The priests bring the ark into the Holy of Holies. And the text says, "A cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the kabod of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." Same word, same physical reality. The priests cannot do their job, not because they cannot see, but because the room has filled with something they cannot move through. The presence of God has weight. Here's something most people miss. This is not poetic language. The Hebrew Bible treats the kabod of God as a real, physical, locatable presence, something that fills space, something that can move from one place to another, something that can leave. And in Ezekiel chapter 10, that is exactly what it does. The prophet watches the kabod of the Lord rise up from above the cherubim, move to the threshold of the temple, pause, and then leave. It departs eastward. The weight lifts off the building, and from that moment forward, the temple is just a building. The substance is gone. This is one of the most underappreciated moments in the entire Old Testament. The kabod can leave, which means it has weight that can be added or removed, which means glory in the English sense. Brightness, splendor, fame was never the right translation. Brightness does not depart. Weight does. The English word lost the physics of what was actually happening. And the moment the kabod leaves, history changes. Within 20 years, Babylon will burn the temple to the ground. The building that had stood for almost 400 years collapses in a single night. But Ezekiel is showing us something the historians missed. The fire was not the end. The end came earlier. The end came the moment the weight rose up and walked east. Once the kabod was gone, the temple was already a corpse. The Babylonians just buried it. Now here is where the Psalms start to come alive. Because once you understand that kabod is weight, every psalm that uses the word reads completely differently. Take Psalm 24. "Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of Kabod may come in." Who is this King of Kabod? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of Kabod may come in. Who is this King of Kabod? The Lord of hosts, he is the King of Kabod. Read that with weight instead of glory. The gates are being told to lift higher because something heavy is about to enter. Something so heavy the doors have to be raised to let it through. The image is not a king walking in radiant. The image is a king walking in dense, solid, weighty. The Lord of hosts, the commander of armies, with the gravitational pull of every battle he has ever won, is walking through the gate. The doors have to rise to make room for the mass. And the repetition in the psalm, the way the question, "Who is this king of Kabod?" gets asked twice and answered twice, is not stylistic. It is the sound of a gate being pried up a second time because the first lift was not enough. The doors keep needing to rise. The weight keeps growing. The text itself is straining under the mass it is trying to let through. Here is where it gets heavier. Psalm 19 says the heavens declare the Kabod of God. Most English readers picture stars shining as a metaphor for God's glory. The Hebrew is saying something different. The heavens declare the weight of God. The sky is so vast, so heavy, so densely filled with stars that just looking at it tells you something about the substance of the one who made it. Creation is not a postcard for God's beauty. It is an inventory of God's mass. Or take Psalm 73. Asaph is in crisis. He sees the wicked prospering. He almost loses his faith. And then he goes into the sanctuary of God. And he writes, "You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will receive me to Kabod." Most translations say to glory. But the Hebrew is saying something else. You will receive me to weight, to substance, to something that counts. Asaph is not saying he wants to go to a bright place. He is saying he wants to be brought into the realm of what actually matters, the realm of weight, where the wicked, despite their prosperity, are weightless, where the righteous, despite their suffering, are heavy. The Hebrew word for vain or empty in the same psalm is hevel. It is the same word that opens the book of Ecclesiastes. Vapor, breath, the thing you can see for a second when you exhale on a cold morning, and then it is gone. The opposite of Kabod. Hevel is what evaporates. Kabod is what remains. This is the architecture the Psalms are built on. Two categories of existence, Kabod and hevel, weight and breath, substance and vapor. The wicked seem heavy in the moment, but they are vapor. The righteous seem light in the moment, but God is bringing them into weight. And the Kabod of God is the gravitational center that pulls everything real toward itself. Every psalm that complains about the prosperity of the wicked is wrestling with the same question. Why does the vapor look so solid right now and the substance so thin? Notice this. The Psalms never answer that question with reasoning. They answer it with location. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I discerned their end. The sanctuary is the place where the Kabod is. And the moment Asaph stands inside the weight, the vapor outside becomes visible for what it actually is. Hevel. Quick word before we continue. If this video is helping you see Scripture in a way you had not seen it before, consider becoming a member of this channel. Members get access to extended studies, early uploads, and a small community where these conversations continue. To everyone who is already a member, thank you. You are the reason this channel can keep doing the work of going deep into texts that most people only skim. Now back to Kabod. Here is the architectural center of the entire concept. There is a moment in Exodus chapter 33 that almost nobody preaches because most readers do not understand what is being asked. Moses says to God, "Please show me your Kabod, show me your weight, show me your substance. Let me see the thing that filled the tabernacle." But to understand the weight of that request, you have to understand where Moses is standing when he asks it. Israel has just built the golden calf. 40 days earlier, the Kabod descended on Sinai with thunder and smoke, and the people trembled at the foot of the mountain. The Kabod was so heavy the ground itself shook. The mountain became, for those 40 days, the heaviest place on earth. And then while Moses was still on the mountain receiving the law, the people downstairs were forging an idol. They had tasted the weight and they had run from it. They wanted a God they could carry, not a God whose weight they had to stand under. The covenant has been broken before the ink is dry. God tells Moses to take the people to the land he promised, but he himself will not go with them. The Kabod will not travel with this people. And Moses, in one of the most courageous sentences in the Old Testament, says, if your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. He is willing to forfeit the promised land rather than walk without the weight. He has tasted what the Kabod is, and he knows that life without it is hevel, vapor, a land without substance. A people without God is not a people. It is in that exact moment, after refusing to leave without the Kabod, that Moses says, "Please show me your weight." And God's answer is one of the strangest sentences in the Hebrew Bible. He says, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim my name the Lord before you. But you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." Then God puts Moses in the cleft of a rock, covers him with his hand, and passes by, and as he passes, he proclaims his name. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Notice what happened. Moses asked to see Kabod. God answered by speaking his name. The weight of God is the character of God. The substance of God is his mercy, his graciousness, his patience, his hesed, his faithfulness. The Kabod is not a glow surrounding God. It is who God actually is, made visible. The reason no one can see it directly is not because it is too bright, it is because it is too heavy. To stand in front of the unfiltered weight of who God is would crush a human being. That is why the Kabod has to be mediated. In Exodus, it is mediated through cloud. In the temple, through smoke. In Ezekiel, through the cherubim. In every encounter, the weight has to be wrapped in something that allows a human to be near it without being destroyed by it. The cloud is not hiding God. The cloud is shielding the human. The smoke is not a mystical effect. It is a buffer, something thick enough to filter the density into a form a body can survive. And then the New Testament does something almost unbelievable. The Gospel of John opens with these words, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his Kabod." Kabod is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Greek word John uses there is doxa, which is the standard Septuagint translation of Kabod. John is not saying we saw a glow around Jesus. He is saying we saw the weight of God in a body. The substance that filled the tabernacle, the density that filled the temple, the mass that departed in Ezekiel, has now walked into a room and sat down at a table. And the verb John uses for dwelt is even more startling. It is the Greek eskenosin, tabernacled. He pitched his tent among us. The Kabod that filled the tabernacle is now wearing flesh as its tabernacle. The glory that needed cloud and smoke and cherubim to be mediated is now mediated by skin and bone. A man you can talk to, a man you can touch, a man whose feet get tired and whose voice gets hoarse. The weight of God in a body that weighs roughly 170 pounds. Think about what that means for how the Gospels read. When Jesus walks into a room and people fall down, they are not reacting to brightness, they are reacting to weight. When the soldiers come to arrest him in the garden and he says, "I am he," and they fall back to the ground, that is Kabod, the unfiltered weight pushing them back. When Peter sees the catch of fish and says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man," that is Kabod, the weight of holiness pressing on a man who knows he cannot stand under it. This is also why the transfiguration matters in a way most readers miss. On the mountain, Jesus is changed. His face shines. His clothes become white. And what does Luke call it? He says they saw his Kabod, the doxa of God in a body briefly unfiltered. Peter and James and John are not watching a magic trick. They are watching the cloud lift, the mediation thinning, the full weight breaking through skin for a moment. And Peter, predictably, falls on his face, because no human body has ever stood in front of unmediated Kabod and remained upright. He is not dazzled, he is crushed. The same physics that knocked Moses to the floor of the tent is knocking Peter to the dirt of the mountain. And notice who appears with Jesus on that mountain, Moses and Elijah, the two men in the entire Old Testament who had asked to see the Kabod and lived. Moses in the cleft of the rock, Elijah in the cave at Horeb, standing at the same mountain where the Kabod had descended on Sinai. Both of them had come closer to the weight than anyone else, and both had been mediated through stone and wind and silence. Now they are standing next to the source, talking to him as a man, with no mediation at all. The thing they had glimpsed through cracks is now wearing a face. And what are they discussing? Luke tells us. They were speaking of his exodus, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. The Greek word is exodos, departure, the same word for the original exodus from Egypt. They are talking about the moment when the Kabod, having become flesh, will go through death itself and come out the other side. The weight that filled the tabernacle is preparing to be laid in a tomb. And Moses and Elijah, of all people, understand exactly what is at stake. And the moment that completes the entire arc is in 2 Corinthians 4. Paul is writing in Greek to a Greek-speaking audience, but Paul was a Pharisee. He was thinking in Hebrew. And he writes this: "Our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal kabod." The Greek phrase is baris doxas. Baris means weight. Doxas is the genitive of glory. Paul wrote, in Greek, the phrase weight of glory. He is preserving the Hebrew metaphor inside Greek. He is reaching back through hundreds of years of translation drift and putting the kavad back into the kabod. What Paul is saying is breathtaking. The suffering you are carrying right now, the things that feel heavy to you, are themselves manufacturing weight, eternal weight, real weight, the kind that the kabod of God is made of. Your suffering is being converted into substance, into something that lasts, into something with mass. And notice the contrast Paul builds. The affliction is light, the glory is heavy. In Greek, the words are elafron and baros, light and weight. The thing that feels unbearable now is actually the lighter side of the scale. The thing being built on the other side outweighs it. Paul is saying that what looks like crushing pressure is actually the smaller mass. The kabod being formed in the believer is the heavier one, eternal, substantial, real. This is why the Psalms make so much more sense once you have kabod in your head. David writes in Psalm 62, "My soul, wait in silence for God only, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress, I shall not be greatly shaken." Then he writes, "On God rests my salvation and my kabod." Most translations read, "On God rests my salvation and my glory." But David is saying something stronger. "On God rests my salvation and my weight, the thing that gives me substance, the thing that keeps me from being vapor. Without him I am hevel, breath. With him I have weight, I count." Or Psalm 8. "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the angels, and crowned him with kabod and honor." Most readers picture a halo. The Hebrew is saying something deeper. You have crowned humanity with weight. You have given a creature made of dust the kind of substance that makes him count in the universe. Man is not a vapor. Man is a kabod bearer, a weight carrier, made to reflect the density of God himself. Or Psalm 84. "How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs, yea, faints for the courts of the Lord." Why does the psalmist faint? Because the courts of the Lord are where the Kabod lives, and his soul, his nephesh, the breath inside him, is reaching for substance. He is hevel, reaching for kabod, vapor, reaching for weight. The whole psalm is the gravity of a man being pulled toward the only mass dense enough to give him form. Or Psalm 29. "The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of Kabod thunders. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness." Most readers picture this as a lightning storm. Dramatic but distant. The Hebrew is saying something different. The voice of the heavy God shakes things because it is heavy. It carries mass. When God speaks, the cedars do not break because the volume is loud. They break because the words have weight, substance, density that the trees cannot hold. Every line of Psalm 29 is a kabod meter, measuring the consequences of a single sentence spoken by a God whose words are heavy enough to crack stone. Or Psalm 85. Verse 9 reads, "Surely his salvation is near to those who fear him, that kabod may dwell in our land." Most translations say that glory may dwell in our land. The Hebrew is asking something concrete. May weight dwell here. May substance return to our soil. May the kabod that left in Ezekiel come back to the temple, to the city, to the people. The whole psalm is a prayer for the gravitational center of Israel to return, for a country that has gone hevel to be made kabod again. This is the Old Testament's deepest hope. hidden inside a word that English translation has flattened. The whole story is the Kabod arriving, the Kabod departing, and the Kabod being promised back. Eden was Kabod. The fall was Hevel. The tabernacle was Kabod returning. Exile was Kabod departing. And every prophet from Isaiah to Malachi is asking the same question. When will the weight come back? When will substance return to a planet that has been reduced to vapor? And here is the New Testament closing of the loop. In Romans 8, Paul writes that the creation itself waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, but in hope. The Greek word for futility is metaios. The Septuagint uses it to translate hevel, the very word from the Psalms, vapor, breath. The whole creation, Paul is saying, has been reduced to hevel, and it is waiting to be brought back into kabod, into weight, into substance. Here is where it ends. The Hebrew word kabod is not poetry. It is physics. It is the real category of substance that the Old Testament uses to describe what God is and what humanity was made for. When the kabod fills the tabernacle, the room has new mass. When the kabod departs from the temple, the building goes weightless. When David asked to dwell in the house of the Lord forever, he is asking to live inside the weight. And when the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, the weight that filled the tabernacle put on a body and walked into history. The Psalms read differently now. When you see glory in your English Bible, do not picture brightness. Picture weight. Picture mass. Picture something dense enough to fill a room, dense enough to push back an army, dense enough to be carried in a body that walked the roads of Galilee. That is what the psalmists were singing about. That is what Moses asked to see. That is what John says he saw. And that is what Paul says is being manufactured in the suffering of every believer who has ever felt their faith reduced to vapor, an eternal weight of glory. The kabod that is being built inside you right now, heavier than the suffering, heavier than the doubt, heavier than the years that feel wasted, real weight, real substance, eternal kabod. This is why Paul can say in the same letter that we are being transformed from one degree of doxa to another, from one level of weight to another. The Christian life is not the addition of religious feeling. It is the slow accumulation of substance. The believer is becoming heavier, more dense, more like the weight that walked into the room in the Gospels. And every season of suffering, every season of waiting, every season that feels weightless and empty is the very thing that is adding mass. Think about what that does to how you read your own life. The moments that felt wasted are not wasted. The years that felt like vapor are not vapor. The waiting that felt like silence is not silence. Something is being added, something with weight, something that is being woven into a kind of substance that the New Testament says will outlast the stars. Your kabod is being formed, slowly, quietly, underneath the noise of a life that often feels like it is producing nothing at all. Underneath the surface where you cannot see it, real, eternal, heavy. That is the answer the Psalms have been waiting to give. Not a happier life, not a brighter life, a heavier life, a life with weight, a life that does not evaporate at the first wind, a life that sits down inside the kabod of God and lets the substance of who He is start to fill the rooms inside the body, until the believer himself becomes a kind of tabernacle, a place where the kabod is starting to dwell again. If this video helped you see something you had not seen before, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next one. Leave a comment with the verse that just changed for you now that you read it through Kabod instead of glory. Share this with someone who reads the Psalms and feels like the words slide off the page, because the moment they have the right Hebrew word in their head, the words get heavy again. Thank you for watching. God bless you.